Hello all, welcome back to our channel, World of Risk. We'll today dive into key international AML standards and bodies. So in the previous lecture, we have seen basically what is AML and what are the stages of money laundering and what are those basically. Now we'll go ahead and see what are the international standards and bodies that are involved. So let's get started. So this is the contents, basically introduction to AML standards, then international standards and bodies, then standards, then challenges in implementing these standards, and few interview questions. So the first is introduction to what AML is if anybody is returning. So for them, returning viewers or new viewers. So money laundering basically refers to converting bad money or dirty money to white money and moving it within the system to lose its track. Simple as that, money laundering. Now, within the AML framework, we also have included new concept known as terror financing. So what is terror financing basically? Is using dirty or clean money to finance terrorist activities. Simple. Difference between money laundering and terror financing. Money laundering, dirty money to clean money. Terror financing, dirty, clean to finance dirty activities or terror activities. So that's the simple explanation. Now, why, as we saw in the last lecture, why AML standards are put in place to prevent crimes, to prevent terrorism, to prevent fall of government, to prevent instability in the economy. So these are some of the importance why these AML standards were introduced and they need to be followed. So now let's go to the next lecture. So international AML standards and bodies. So we'll see some of the international bodies that are responsible for keeping AML checks. So the first is the Financial Action Task Force. So this is one of the biggest organization that keeps a track on this terror financing and AML activities or money laundering activities. So FATF is a intergovernmental organization. That means it is not restricted to one government. However, it is within many governments and hence intergovernmental organization. So it was established in 1989. The first objective of establishment was money laundering, but in 2001, FATF decided that they would also include terror financing within their regime. So now they work on money laundering as well as terror financing. As of today, we have 40 member countries, in 40 members in the FATF, 38 jurisdictions, and two regional organizations. So remember, these sometimes come in the interviews or the questions like what are the members of how many members. So you can go ahead and pause the video and check it out. So how do FATF go ahead and do that? So FATF releases few recommendations, a series of recommendations in which they talk about customer due diligence, reporting, then suspicious transactions, those rules and regulations related to the AML, then how international organizations should cooperate, then regulations and supervisions. All these things are mentioned in the FATF recommendations. Now, once these recommendations are passed down, so they will go ahead and call the member countries and tell them that we have passed these new things, and then member countries need to implement this. So they go ahead and assess and evaluate these member countries or member jurisdictions, and once they find that something is missing or they are not following these frameworks, then FATF places them within few of the lists that are published by FATF. It is like known as the gray list, black list. So these are kind of lists that are published by the FATF. So they will place them based on their adherence to the framework. So as a compliance analyst or as a AML analyst or as a person who works in the AML field, we come across or this FATF list, we do go ahead and check whenever there is some kind of information we require on the countries or the jurisdictions. So let's move on to the next one, the BASEL Committee on Banking Supervision. So this is also an international body. So it was formed in basically 1974 and was formed by the banks of the world or the financial institutions. So how do this committee is involved with the AML? So basically, they will also implement strong AML laws, and they work closely with FATF, and then they define guidelines for banks or institutions to go ahead with risk assessment, customer due diligence, reporting suspicious transactions and activities, then appointing MLROs, then the training of these employees. So these kind of framework they go ahead and set up. So the BCBS. So next is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So everybody have heard about IMF. So what is IMF basically? It can be seen as the lender of the national government. So whenever there is some issues or they need money, then they move to the IMF and they kind of go ahead and do that. So basically, IMF is working for, like, say, monetary stability, financial stability, then facilitate international trade, then to promote sustainable growth, and also they are fighting to reduce poverty. So, as of now, we have 190 countries within the IMF, and IMF, what they do is they do policy advice, technical assistance, and training to build AML framework. Now, once this is done, what IMF goes ahead and do, it will assess the member countries on the international AML laws. And then once they will do the assessment or these exams are done or the assess evaluations are done, and FATF is like a buddy. So it will come to you and they will identify the weakness, gaps, areas, and help you improve these frameworks. So as you can see, the point number three, what the IMF does is include training officials, supporting the development of legislation and regulations, and improving supervisory and enforcement mechanism. So these are what kind of things the IMF does. Now let's go into the Wolfsburg Group. So Wolfsburg Group is a non-governmental organization. Till now we have seen two governmental organizations. This is a non-governmental organization. Remember the difference. This is another interview question. Governmental bodies versus non-governmental AML bodies. So this is a non-governmental. So Wolfsburg Group basically started in 1999 with 12 banks or financial institutions, huge financial institutions, meeting and drafting policies on KYC, AML, counter-terrorist, the funding. So these kind of things. Currently, we have 13 members in the Wolfsburg group. So this group include members like Bank of America, Barclays, Deutsche Bank, then Goldman Sachs, HSBC, and then you have UBS, Standard Chartered. So these huge organizations are part of this group. So they also draft like regulations on how these institutions should work and implement the AML like framework also with the terror financing framework. So this is another non-governmental group. So you can pause this video and go through this quickly. I have summarized some of the points. Let's go and see the next group. Again, we have another group which is the Egmont group. This is an international organization that facilitates cooperation and intelligence sharing between the FIUs. So basically, it was found in 1995. We have 177 FIUs till date, and they do is they will go ahead and facilitate the information exchange between these FIUs. So they collect information on suspicious or unusual activities, and they process the information and provide within these FIUs. So remember, Egmont Group is related to the financial intelligence units. Now we have another organization which is known as United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, or UNODC. This organization was set up in 1997, headquartered in Vienna, Austria. Now, why this was set up was because to fight drugs, basically, money from drugs, illegal activity from drugs or crime. So this was set up, but it has expanded its limits to criminal justice and international terrorism and political corruption also. So remember, there is this organization is also there to fight money laundering as well as terror financing. Now we saw some of the bodies. Now we'll quickly go ahead and see two frameworks or standards that we already talked about, but we'll go and see. The first is the FATF 40 recommendations. So as we already talked that FATF releases guidelines or recommendations, and we have FATF 40 recommendations, which is a framework for the international organizations to abide by and to follow for AML and this terror financing, counter terror financing activities. So they go ahead and talk about due diligence, then suspicious activities. So these kind of things are in the FATF 40 recommendations. During this course of the lectures, we'll definitely go ahead and touch FATF because it is one of the most important aspects in interviews or exams, or you can say any of the competitive exams also. So next we'll see BASEL framework. So everybody knows what BASEL is. It is a framework which was given by the BCBS. So how BASEL and AML is tied up? This is a question that many of the interviewers ask. Can you tell me how BASEL and AML is linked? So basically, Basel, what it does is, it within its framework, there is a section or which focuses on basically implementing risk-based approach to the anti-money laundering activities. So here, banks need to like kind of do risk-based assessment of their customers, products, services, then geographic locations. So all those things need to be checked, and then implement internal controls so that no violations is done. These banks also need to monitor and report if any violations or transactions or suspicious transactions are seen. So I think you have heard about suspicious activity reporting and suspicious transactions reporting, so commonly known as SAR and STRs. So these are something which falls under this framework, and this framework also mandates appointing MLRO and doing regular training of the employees and all those things. So this is how Basel and AML is related. Then IMF's role, we already discussed. Like IMF goes ahead and does this gap identification, then cooperation. They help in cooperation within the member states. Then they assess the effectiveness of AML framework. So these kind of things the IMF does. Now let's focus on the challenges. So till now we have talked about the bodies, the regulations. This needs to be done, that needs to be done. But what are the challenges that commonly is faced in implementing these kind of regulations? Lack of harmonization among countries. So this is one of the biggest challenge that they find is no two countries have the perfect relation. So harmony between the organizations or countries is one of the biggest challenge to implement a uniform AML procedure or AML framework. Next is capacity constraint in certain jurisdiction. So this is where some countries, say highly developed countries, they have technology, they have the resources to go ahead, or the expertise, the manpower, the learnings to implement the advanced AML frameworks. However, say the developing countries or the underdeveloped countries, they may not have this same kind of uh, resources available with them to go ahead and implement the AML framework or measures. So this is one of the another challenge. Then there is the technological adaptation. So certain jurisdictions or certain organizations do not have that technology to adapt the new upcoming technologies in the AML. Say AI, this needs money, this needs resources. So certain jurisdictions, certain organizations, so may not have this ability to go ahead with the technical adaptations. Then again, we have this cross-border regulatory compliance. Again, one jurisdiction is different from another jurisdiction. The regulation set up by, say, the local authority may be different from one another. So conflict within this cross-border jurisdiction may also result in non-implementation of this AML frameworks. Now, let's go and see few questions that were asked recently within this AML domain. So these were the questions that were asked in the interviews for compliance analyst, AML analyst, say senior associate compliance, trade surveillance. So these are some of the roles that basically comes into the AML domain. So you will go ahead and see those kind of roles. So let's go ahead with the questions. So the first one was, can you explain the role of the Financial Action Task Force in combating money laundering and terror financing? So you need to explain about this FATF and how they go ahead and do this combat terror financing. The next was, what are the latest updates or amendments to the FATF recommendations and how do they impact AML CFT efforts globally? So you need to be very updated with the FATF recommendations and updations or amendment that happens. So they will ask you about this. The third was, how does the role of a FIU contribute to AML efforts and what are the some of its key functions? So here you need to focus on FIUs, like Financial Intelligence Unit. What do they do? Like basically they go ahead and check these transactions, they report transactions. So these kind of things you need to talk about in this question. So the next was, can you differentiate between the FATF recommendation and regional AML bodies like the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering or the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force? So here they have went ahead and asked specifics, like what is the difference between a international organization and again a local or regional organization. So as we told that you can go ahead and talk about the challenges, the difference in the jurisdiction, the difference in the framework, the difference in the capability of implementing rules and regulations. So these kind of things you can go ahead and do talk about. So the next is, what role do non-financial business and professionals like play in AML CFE and how they are regulated? So here you need to understand like what are the DNFBP. So these are basically the third parties like lawyers and everything, which is involved somehow with this AML framework, but not directly involved. So you need to talk about them, like how these are regulated and what is their role. So these kind of questions and tricky questions are asked in AML interviews. So rest assured, we will go ahead and cover whatever we have latest and information, and we'll also check these recommendations one by one. In our next lecture, we will go ahead and dive deep into these groups or say the bodies and take one by one and see what these do. So stay tuned for this. And once again, thank you all for your support. Please keep subscribing. This is a long lecture because this is a very important lecture and we cannot skip it. And so please watch the whole video because this will really help you in some point of time. And please subscribing. Thank you for all your love and support. Have a great day. Bye bye.